David, you and I were talking earlier that I do have a sense of need to document 2 4-year terms with a year of furlough in between that Helen and I spent when we were working in Thailand. I was recruited to be the first of 2 couples to man a brand new station. This was by the American Baptist Mission and the Disciples of Christ Mission working in Thailand in a non-denominational United Protestant Church there, which is run by the Thai, called the Church of Christ in Thailand. So we arrived there in 1958 with that decision having been made. Had been a number of visits to areas along the Thai-Burma border, and there was a group of Burmese immigrants that they were concerned with establishing work, which were the Karen. The Karen have been a significant refugee group. They had a deep tradition of Christianity, three generations old in Burma, going clear back to a very early pioneer missionary, Judson, working in Burma, very famous. These folks were fleeing the conflict that's now almost 60 years old, maybe even longer, between Karen and the Burmese. There are as many Karen in Burma as there are ethnic Burmese. And there are more Shan people, so Burma is very complicated. But there was this deep interest of a people that were refugees locating along the border, and this was among the most approachable spots where we could establish medical work and a school and try to serve the refugees. That was the decision to go. There's a man who was famous in mission studies who was an important part of that. His name was McGavran, and he taught at Biola in Los Angeles, and it was a lot of his thinking about this was part of the decision making. We went, studied nearly 2 years in Bangkok, and we arrived with 2 kids, and Han was born in Bangkok. So we had 3 kids by that time. Then all these preparations were happening for them to get started. The concept was we had a river. And the river, this last village, 25 kilometers from the Burma border, was called Sangklapuri village, and it had about 5,000 or 8,000 people, a mixture of people from Thai and Mon and Karen, and many of them had been there for generations, and then there were a number of refugees. The Karen were the largest ethnic group there. Many of them had been there, like I said, for some time. So we were given a piece of property by the village, and it was located right on the river. It was a great location, and the decision was to take all the materials from downriver to build 2 residences. They were 2-story homes. Upstairs, we lived on 1 level, and storage underneath. A lot of buildings in Thailand were up on stilts. It gets you up into the breeze, gets you away from the termites and other bugs, and it was the way homes were built. And so over about a 1.5 year period, those 2 homes were built, and I and Helen and our children with another couple, Paul and Winnie Dodge, who were from the American Baptist Mission, moved up together. Winnie was a nurse, and Paul was an evangelist and an educator, and Helen and I was there to start medical work. We had no hospital. We were able during the wet season to haul supplies up, and we were able to do that somewhat conveniently by river barge. But the minute the river dried down, it would take us 3 days travel from Bangkok. Go by train 1 day, and then get into a long-tail boat, which was long and skinny, and we tried different kinds of boats, but these always worked the best because they were locally made and maintained. And we had one at the mission, and then we could rent them, and they would take us up 2 days. We spent one night sleeping along the river at a village on our way. And we moved up lock, stock, and barrel with our kids in a rainy season, and settled in and started working. And I built a little wood shed, and we did our first medical care out of a wooden clinic, 2-room clinic. And we had a pharmacy on one end. I had an exam table on one side, and open windows. And I had some early surgery on that table with the neighbors looking in through the window. So those were the early beginnings. And of course, we were busy at the same time getting this new building started. We had a number of missionary partners who were coming up. We had an architect in the system who was working elsewhere, but he helped work up the plan. We had a man who had this soil cement compressor that made these blocks, and by the time we came back for the second tour, we had our building ready to go, and we were able to dedicate and get into the hospital within another year or two. We built a hospital that had about 25 beds, 2 operating rooms, and a laboratory area. And nearby, we put a school dormitory and used the local schools, and soon had our own school. We had some pretty amazing experiences. Nurse Winnie Dodge and I became a closely working partnership, and there are some amazing things that have happened at the Cry River Christian Hospital, which we started and is still going, but those years were pretty amazing. We had no idea how we'd be accepted by these folks. Here was this strange white doctor. This was malaria country, and fevers were important. And if you had a fever, you called the spirit doctor in, and they had a ceremony where they would boil it was kind of a coconut oil, and it had bubbles, and they would count the bubbles as the number of spots of bad odors and problems out of their patients by counting those spots. And sometimes people survived the fever and they were successful, and sometimes not. And I was bringing in my potions and lotions, but the Thai word for going to the doctor is, I'm going to get a shot. So we learned quickly that to be a modern doctor in their minds, we gave them a vitamin B shot and then also gave them the chloroquine pills to take for their malaria, and that made it work okay, but they did get their shot. But young Jute came into the hospital grounds one time. He was a Mon, and he was starving to death. He had an ulcer in his stomach that had scarred down the outlet of his stomach so that he was not able to move food through except very thin liquids. And you could actually see the peristalsis of his stomach trying to move food through if he lay down. And I decided that he wouldn't live if I didn't try to do something. I didn't have an operating room, but we had materials, and Winnie helped me put together a plan, and we did a small procedure where I actually made a small incision and pulled up a loop of small bowel and attached it to the stomach to bypass its obstruction. And with people looking in the window in that little wooden clinic that we had next door to our home. And Jute survived that and soon was thriving, and he was the best advertisement we had in town, walking around. Pretty soon he was working and helping us in gardening. So gradually we did develop our reputation. And I remember another experience where one of the village elders' wife was desperately ill, and I went to see her, and I elected to send over, I got the IV fluids and hung the IV fluids to a loop from the bamboo rafter where she was in her village home, and started the IV, and she had significant malaria, and I gave her medication for that, and stayed there overnight to monitor her symptoms, and she survived. And that was another one of those events you don't understand how important they are, but it turns out her husband was one of the early spirit doctors. And so I was being called in consultation to the spirit doctor whose Kaidum treatment hadn't helped. And since we worked, so I often would try to look at this as consultations, and we were working with people rather than replacing them. As a missionary's kid, it seemed quite a natural part of the way life is. And we were back in Asia. I had wanted to get back to China, of course, but that wasn't feasible. And so that was part of why I was happy to get an opportunity to go to Asia. We felt at home. The language helps, and we acculturated. Our friends were there. If you have the language, it's very important to connect with people. And they know you've paid some prices to understand them, and that makes a difference in your relationships. And I felt as though I had an opportunity to make a difference in a community and help start some things that have continued. That's very satisfying. You know, at best times is hard to measure because I've had some wonderful experiences here as a physician and teaching and being involved, but that was certainly a key part of my view of what medicine is all about and what has given me satisfaction. And it was a positive experience for Helen and I and our kids. One of the key reasons we came home, other than the fact that our kids were getting old and things were happening in their lives, that I was not happy with them having a baseball game at a little league in Bangkok and I'm not being part of it. So we decided that, besides by that time we had more kids than the Mission Society was willing to support, so we had kind of biologically eliminated ourselves from returning. Well, I know it's had an impact, and each one of them is impacted in different ways. My son Ken never did get Asia out of his soul. He always figured out some way to get back. He worked most of his life overseas, started back in Thailand. My daughter Pam had great memories and wanted to share some of those experiences with her students at Whitworth, and took tours back every year for a number of years. You know, so those who have had an opportunity have been back, and but their lives still reflect that third world experience. I had some tough decisions about where to settle, but we decided settling here would be the best choice, and it was. I soon established my own practice, and my dad's was aging, and his practice was compacting quickly. And I was pretty soon busier than I wanted to be, and it worked well for us. We bought this house that we're in, and that was in 1967 when we returned. We've been here ever since. And we bought it for $28,000. And we said, what do you want? What kind of house do you want? Well, we want one with bedrooms. We had 7 bedrooms here. We don't need all 7 bedrooms these days, but it's worked well. For me, this has certainly been my community. And the satisfaction I've had of being part of the heritage of my dad and granddad and their commitment to this community has been important and also a very satisfying part of being here for our lifetime. the way I watched my folks grow up with a sense of balance, and that life was about making a difference. I think I see that in those of you in the next generation. That's what you're wanting to do too. You're all very different, doing different things, but you're making a difference. I want my children to know that they are loved, and that we have deep pride in what they're doing, and that we care about what they're doing. And there are ups and downs, but they still are loved. And I hope that they can live out their lives knowing that they don't have anything to live down, not too much. But, I didn't realize till later that people love to have dinner over here because you never knew what was going to be talked about around the dinner table. You know, I'd be on the phone talking to their mother about the color of their baby's stools, and somehow that didn't mix with dinner sometimes. But those were parts of growing up in a medical home and sharing family, sharing their dad sometimes. What do I want to be remembered for? I guess mainly that I've been here, been part of a community, and made a difference. I don't want to be famous. I don't want accolades. I just want the feeling that I did make a difference.